Hello and welcome to Buddhish, where we talk about things that aren't necessarily Buddhism related. So today we are talking about tabletop RPGs. Nick has gotten through his first arc of our tabletop game. So yeah, we wanted to talk about it. How are you feeling, Nick?
Feels really good. It was a really satisfying arc with a nice trajectory of fights of like increasing difficulty, even though the fights were meant to be of increasing difficulty. However, the RNG, the luck, the dice rolled for us to be able to just lay things out more and more effectively as time went on. And so that'll be something that we talk about. But overall, it was a very satisfying arc, and I think that it was very well crafted. And I think that the story and the setting and the encounters fit very well, of course, with the mechanics of your custom system, Story Shaper system. So overall, I feel like I've really slotted into tabletop games in a way that I had not before. I thought of them as this, scary, really complicated, overly difficult thing that I would have to take years or months of practice to actually get remotely good at, and that would be a lot of work and not a lot of fun. But I've picked this up and had a good time and had some really interesting and wonderful interactions with player characters and non-player characters, and I'm really looking forward to the next arc.
Glad to hear it. So, for listeners, let's start by setting the scene a little bit, and we'll just talk about how this campaign went. So, the campaign is set in my custom setting, Rourke, R-O-R-K. In short, it is a high fantasy Magitech setting where the world is dealing with an eternal winter. Like spring just one day stopped happening. It has been winter ever since. And so ever since this eternal winter started, there have been attacks by monsters collectively called Preta, directly influenced by the Buddhist idea of them. So these are monstrous creatures that have an infinite appetite for something very specific. And I do mean infinite. It is a matter of they are always starving, and that motivates all of their actions, which makes them basically a matter where they must be killed. Otherwise, they are going to kill people and try and eat them, or eat everything of a resource that people need, and that's going to cause things to fall apart. It is just a matter of these monsters cannot be reasoned with. They must be stopped by violence. And that is where the three characters that were active before I got Nick into this game start from. They are members of the Monks of the Cold Royalty, a Shaolin-style monastery where they train monster hunters, rather. And that's what the original PCs, Balam, Anezka, and Alani, are coming from. And they are being sent to a small town in the nation of Dalrock to hunt a Gnawer, a type of Preta that feeds on bones, and it is a very dangerous creature in and of itself, and it also, in the process of hunting, it only eats bones, so all of the meat that's left behind afterward attracts less dangerous but more numerous types of Preta. So the deal is we have to find some way to handle both the hordes of lesser monsters it brings and deal with the big monster. So that's where the three more established PCs come in. And then we have Nick's character to get into the mix. You want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so my character is named Gutoku, a direct reference to the self-proclaimed name or the self-claimed name of the Kamakura-era Japanese Buddhist thinker Shinran. He was a Pure Land thinker who championed this idea that moral perfection in an immoral world is impossible as a means of achieving enlightenment, and so the compassion of Amida Buddha must be relied upon in order to get through everything. And that's a very short way of describing it. There's more to it than that, but he has this quote that says, "Even the good man gets into the Pure Land, how much more so the evil man?" And this is summing up his idea that all of this self-originating work towards moral perfection and being a good person is ultimately a dead end, and that basically Amita's compassion and belief in his compassion is what's going to get you born in the Pure Land. And we'll see how that reference kind of plays into my idea of who this character is. So he's a former monk, I guess you would say, but not of the cold royalty. He's actually a monk of this religious order that worships somebody called the Cosmic One. I sort of modeled after Dainichi, after Mahavajracana in Shingon Buddhism. And Dox let me kind of take the reins on a lot of the world building for this religion. I still don't have a name for it, like Buddhism. The Buddha is worshipped by Buddhists. The Cosmic One is worshipped by ? I haven't figured that out yet. But essentially, the Cosmic One has these 13 attendants, and they all have different names, and they all embody different aspects of the Cosmic One himself. They embody his compassion, or his warlike nature, or his meditation, or his nature as being empty, or so on and so forth. Again, this is modeled on the 13 Buddhas in Shingon Buddhism, the Jusan Butsu Shingon. There's like mantras associated with each one and everything. And so I kind of have taken a lot of that structure from existing esoteric Shingon Japanese Buddhism and put it into this world with different names, but a similar function. And so Gutoku, he was raised at a monastery called the Sogi Monastery, and he was born into it. So he didn't renounce. He was born into it, and he basically had a number of different paths available for the future of his life. So he studied and practiced as a generalist, you might say, just studying and practicing everything and doing all the rituals and so on and so forth. But what happened was he went to be tested for one of these three paths. These three paths that were possible were healer, thinker, and just sort of ritual attendant, right? So you could practice to be the more practical, operator of the Cosmic One's religion and rituals and go and heal people. Or you could be a ritual thinker where you do a lot of scholarly work. You do a lot of exegesis on the texts. You're a scholar monk. Or you could be somebody who just kind of performs stuff at the monastery themselves. You would teach youths, you would clean up, you would maintain, you would do whatever. He failed the tests to be all of these and got very upset about that and left the monastery in a fit when he was in his early 20s. And he was visited by an attendant of the Cosmic One. The one that he was visited by was Nyoirin. Nyoirin is actually another name for a Kannon or Avalokiteshvara avatar or manifestation in Japanese Buddhism. And it represents the Cosmic One's universal compassion. And in this encounter, his sight was taken away from him. So he lost his sight basically permanently from this encounter. But in return, he actually gained a lot of the skills and knowledge that he lacked before as kind of like a failed monk. So he was able to return to the monastery and be tested again, and he passed all of the tests. And the expectation is that, you pass one and that's the one you do, but you fail the others. And it's okay because you pass that one, and that's like a clear indicator that you should be doing X and not Y or Z. But he passed all three, and the monks there thought that he cheated, or they thought that he did something wrong. They were angry that he left. And so he then kind of had a mutual parting of ways with them, and he went off on pilgrimage. So you can be a walking pilgrim as a practitioner of this religion of the Cosmic One, and you can go visit these different pilgrimage sites all over Rourke. And these are temples that may have a shrine to an attendant of the Cosmic One, or they may have a practitioner, or it may be a monastery. It could be staffed with people, or it could not be. And it's essentially an excuse to get this character out of the temple, out of the monastery. So he is a healer in tabletop RPG terms. He casts healing spells. And as a vaguely Buddhist sounding guy, I made some rules for him at the start. One of my rules is that he is always barefoot, even if there is snow or ice on the ground, which there is because it's a perma-winter. He's blind, so he cannot ever see anything. He can't ever describe things that, you would describe with words like from sight. So he doesn't describe things in terms of color or in terms of shape or anything like that. He always, for the most part, navigates just with his ears and with other senses. There is an exception to that, which we'll probably talk about at some point, but he's blind and he's nonviolent. So I made sure to never give him a move that reduces the HP of a character or an enemy or anything else in game. Now, this is a sort of plot arc for him that goes beyond just the plot arc that I just participated in, because I think that the direction I'm taking the character is that eventually he will rethink his nonviolent vows, his nonviolent nature, and begin to see that these Preda are such a real, unreasonable threat that he has to resort to violence in order to be able to protect himself and protect others from them. But he is ultimately, for this arc's purposes, nonviolent. So it's been very interesting traveling with this group because in game, in character, so to speak, he's a newcomer. So there's differing levels of sort of being comfortable with him, right? I would say that Alani is probably the most like buddy-buddy with this character in game. She's the most likely to, include him, talk to him, say things to him, be a friend to him. Balam is the next most. I would call him neutral-leaning positive, neutral-leaning friendly to Gutoku. And then Anezka is the most suspicious. And after this particular arc we just finished, is only just now coming around to Gutoku really being a part of the group. And that's just because she's a very pragmatic and a very suspicious and a very cynical character. So she is always, slow to trust, and she's always slow to open up to new characters, to new people. So she's only just now come around because I've been able to hold my own in the fights that we've had. But yeah, I've really shaped Gutoku around a lot of things about myself. I think that as my first RPG character, it was the easiest to reach for things and themes that were true to me in real life, right? So he loves animals very, very much, almost comically or childishly so. And he has this interest in like Buddhism and likes to tell stories around the campfires about his experience at the monastery or stories from this Cosmic One religion. And he's really good with languages. So he actually has learned Dal and the main common language, Eldar. And I believe that in the next arc, he'll probably end up learning a new language. And he also can speak with plants and animals and even minerals and grass and earth and soil. And on target for me eventually is to make him able to talk to the recently and the ancient dead. So that'll be cool as well. And he's very dutiful and he feels his emotions very strongly. Another aspect of him that I wanted to approach with creating the character and operating him in the universe is that there's this idea that monks in Buddhism can be very stoic and very like non-emotional or very non-responsive in real life. But my experience has always been the opposite. Every actual Buddhist monk I've ever known hasn't been less emotional. They've actually been far more so. And not in like a manic sort of way, but they've just felt their emotions way more on the sleeve than people would expect, right? They cry readily and easily, and they just get emotional about the doctrine and about compassion and about suffering and stuff like that, especially in Japanese Buddhism. And so Gutoku is known in the group for just being ready to cry anytime, right? We just had an episode at the close of the arc where the owner of a cow was being very nice to the cow and was petting the cow and milking the cow and taking good care of the cow. But in these very caring and loving tones, he was saying awful things to the cow. And Gutoku was the only one in the group who could understand the language that he was speaking. And Gutoku like cried about it, even though that he didn't do anything to hurt the cow. And the cow didn't understand anything that was going on. Gutoku was still just so upset that, he would even say or think those things about an animal. And so there was a whole drama about that where he almost stormed off and broke his vows of nonviolence and punched the guy in the face. But yeah, that's sort of the character that I have put together for this group. And it has more than one purpose, right? So one idea for me making him a healer class type of character is that I need a ramp into combat systems in general. And by being a healer and by having this vow of nonviolence, I can avoid that ramp as long as possible, or at least until I have more data and more observational information from our technical class like Balam or something like that to really make sense of combat in this system. And then the other side too is that Dox needed a healer class to see what that looked like in his system. He needed some data to collect for that. And so I'm giving him some testing data for that based on our game together. And so him being a healer class kind of makes sense on those two levels. And so, yeah, he left a pilgrimage site when he learned the language of Dal'Rok, to join this group. And this has been his first hunt with the Cold Royalty groups. And it's been really fascinating, really interesting.
Glad you liked it so much. And yeah, I very much enjoyed watching you like kind of figure out who Gutoku is and really like get into his mindset. The scene with the cow was really well done. It says a lot about the character. And it also says a lot about the other characters as they responded to that melodramatic reaction. It's like you got into this very quickly in a way that I found very impressive. Like, you've done the role-playing side, the writing side of this really well. It was also interesting to bounce off of Guktoku's lack of sight to practice something that I've struggled with in the past. So for a while before we got him into the hunt, Gutoku was on his own and like doing sessions that was just me talking about what Gutoku was up to. And for those sessions, I did not include any visual information anywhere in it. And that was just a fun way to focus on describing senses other than visual for a while, because I have to. This guy can't see, so what does he hear and smell instead? And that was just... Limitations can bring out a lot of creativity in the right conditions, and I really enjoyed doing that phase of his journey. He has no idea what the people he's working with actually look like. So that was fun for me to write, and hopefully fun for you to read as well.
It was, yeah. And you did a great job of shaping the story around that and shaping the information that Gutoku is presented around his sight limitations. For context, for people who are listening, we're playing this game entirely text-based. So normal, or I guess I should say the majority of tabletop RPGs are commonly played either in person or over Zoom, but, you know, people are talking in and out of character. They're coming up with stuff kind of off the cuff verbally, but for the purposes of like data maintenance and data preservation for Dox for his system, this group, the 3-player characters and Gutoku, we're all playing and engaging by typing into our Discord channel. And so that makes this much more of a writing exercise for everybody, for Dox and for the players, than I think a lot of in-person verbal tabletop RPG games end up being, right? I mean, one of the purposes of tabletop RPG games as a form of entertainment is to craft an interesting story with interesting characters where interesting stuff happens. And to do that verbally is to improvise and to kind of work on the fly. But as much as there is still improvisation and off-the-cuff thinking and interactions when you type it out, there still is more of an aspect of it being thought out. So it's much more, instead of like an improv story, it's much more of like a collaboratively written story, if that makes sense. And I think that has been an interesting exercise for me, and as Doc said, for him as well, for navigating and operating and piloting this character who has these limitations. I've heard before that Dox has also piloted characters that have other situations, other potential, like, didn't you mention to me that you have operated a character or piloted a character who had a different kind of disability, like other than being blind?
Let me think. There have been a couple of characters I've played who were missing a limb, and usually the response to that is a mechanical limb replacement. But also there's like the hermit who was lovingly bad-mouthing his cow is missing a leg. And his response is to just peg leg staff to balance with it, move on with your life. Disability is a thing that can be tricky to work into one's world, because it is commonly a thing in high power settings. This can be sci-fi and fantasy both, where there are ways to just fix the disability. Like I said, in sci-fi games, if I'm missing an arm, it's because there's going to be a mechanical replacement involved there. In a Dungeons and Dragons world, there are spells that are just remove blindness and deafness. So, like, in the systems I've been in, they're usually not even very high-level spells. So, tabletops tend to have there's a tendency to remove disability rather than portray it, and that's also something that I've failed at doing in the past, so I am trying to get better about it, especially since I've become disabled myself between when I'm talking about it now, and it is something that, in general, I want my worlds to feel very diverse, and one aspect of diversity is ability. So I don't remember the last time I had a player character with a major disability in their background, but there are several NPCs the players have dealt with who have something going on that makes their life a little harder. And one way that this can be, that the setting, rather, the high-poweredness of having a Magitech setting can manifest, is that people can have magical disabilities. There is a major NPC that you are going to meet when we get into the next scenes, who has a set of lights that are just always orbiting her, which means she is essentially incapable of stealth. That's just a magical bit of bullshit that she has to take care of. So it's been a conscious choice at this point to include disability, and it is a choice that is often not taken because, like, if you're talking about in combat in a system that expects to simulate things relatively realistically, being disabled is a huge disadvantage. Like, if I am missing an arm, then I can't use a sword and shield, because what am I going to do there? So it is usually not portrayed because it would make the game less fun for somebody who's wanting to do well, to perform well. And I think by keeping my system fairly vague on those kinds of details, it makes room for people to go against that without having a huge combat disadvantage. Like, Gutaku being blind doesn't affect how combat goes for him usually. At least from a mechanical aspect, it does have effects in how you write the combat, but he doesn't have less defense because he can't see. He can compensate for that by hearing the enemy well, and that lets him have his usual defense. So that's kind of been my approach to portraying disability, but in general, being able to portray diversity, like, that's a subgroup of that task, and it's something that I'm trying to get better at.
Yeah, well, and I bring it up because you historically and in this arc as well both have done a great job of accomplishing the diversity goal as much as is possible in these settings with the constraints that you've been mentioning, and also with depicting and piloting characters that are from these, underrepresented groups and who just are kind of, paved over in high fantasy and high sci-fi, right? I mean, I think that there is an issue, globally speaking, with RPG gaming being kind of overwhelmingly like strong white guy, does strong white guy things. And that's reflected in the literature that this stuff is based off of, right? A lot of fantasy and sci-fi is strong white guy does a lot of strong white guy things. And so I think it's a very good and important goal to diversify that group and to diversify and challenge that trope and that pattern. And I think that you're doing a great job in the game itself. And I'm glad that I can be a part of that with having my blind character in there as well.
Yeah, that's a issue that has been very much actively trying to be countered by many different parts of the hobby. Like, Dungeons and Dragons is, I could go for ages talking about why I don't like Dungeons and Dragons, but it does have room to depict a very diverse set of characters. If somebody's playing a D&D game and it's all strong white guys doing things, that's because that's what the characters made. That's not something the system made. And to be clear, nothing against strong white guys. I am going to have strong white guys in this story. I have a specific character that fits directly into that. But I'm also going to try to not make him an asshole about being a white guy. Like,
right.
There's really no concept of white guy versus black guy in this setting, because over there is somebody who is purple. Like,
yeah,
the categories tend to be more along the lines of human, wildkin, dwarf, halfling, orc. Like, that's the kind of bins that people fit into in this system. And like, one of the early scenes that we did with Gutoku while he was on his own was watching a trial happen for a murder case. And in that trial, stereotypes about orcs came up. The accused and the victim were both orc men. There was talk about how they had been fighting each other physically, but also, like, they're orcs. They like that. That's fun to them. And that's just kind of part of their culture, is that, getting into a small fist fight is not at all a matter of conflict necessarily. That they're just, having a fun little fight in their minds. So, like, the stereotypes that, are in the world here do have some purchase in Rourke, but I've tried to make that, a matter that expands these characters' cultures and says something about them that's not necessarily bad or better, it's just different. If I had infinite energy and time and will to type everything up, I could give you an exact description of what Rourke is like from my head right now, but it's a matter of I could reveal it as it comes up in the games, and that flows pretty natural from me, just from a matter of understanding what this world is and what the cultures in it think. So that's kind of how that goes. And so it's a fine line to walk, because there's also been in the past ways to display orcs as being unsubtle nods to things happening in real life that are deeply regrettable. A lot of this kind of thing stems from Gary Gygax, unfortunately, who had some very unfortunate ideas about race in the real world that get reflected in really ugly ways in the mechanics of the games he creates.
Right.
So there is a balance to be had, because if you do it poorly, you get what Gygax implies by half-orcs having lower intelligence scores than other characters. But if you do it poorly, then it's a matter of orcs are just big green humans, and I don't want either extreme.
Yeah, you want diversity to be there, and maybe as a result of there being diversity, there does end up being some hateful characters who have some really wrong opinions.
Oh yeah.
But then ultimately baked into the system ideally is not any sort of mapping from the real world into this fantasy world, right? Fantasy is so powerful because we can, with the flick of a wand, say the core fundamental foundation of this world and this narrative is free of any inherent racism, sexism, ableism, any sort of hate, right? And so then you can, in that setting, develop hateful characters that have plot significance without endorsing their hate and without any of that hate being transferable back to the world. So we could say like, oh yeah, clearly this is just a case where this guy is expressing his views on black people, or this is a guy expressing his views on women, or this is a guy, whatever.
Editor Dox here. To be fair to a game I don't like, Dungeons & Dragons has done a lot in recent editions to get away from this trap. They're starting to refer to a character's species rather than race, a more accurate way to describe the differences. They also focus on different species' strengths rather than weaknesses. For example, in 5th edition D&D, half-orcs still have a strength bonus, but they don't have an intelligence penalty like they did in 3rd edition. There are still problems with D&D, a few too many species being listed as always or usually evil, for example. But overall, their design is going in the right direction, at least on this topic. Not so much in game design, but that's for another day.
So, like, it's a case where if there is any purchase for real-world hate, then it is as a narrative device to develop and expand and make more real the world that you're building, because the real world does have diversity and it does have hate. So it makes sense that this imaginary world would also have those.
As a matter of the way I run games, I will never include any kind of queer phobia in my plot lines, and I am, at this point, extremely resistant to anything like misogyny, and any kind of bigotry like that is blanket permission to dislike the character that I am conveying here. Like you said, depiction is not endorsement, and the big evil side of this world I've vaguely packed into the Inquisition. And so, like, those guys are going to be doing some horrible things, and have done horrible things, and is going to be a problem for the group because they are a hateful sect. But they are the exceptions, and we're talking about a setting with an eternal winter, so that seems like it would be pretty dystopian, but I've added a more utopian aspect to this in that the people in my world are, on average, going to be less awful than the world that we have here. Like, one of the biggest power fantasies that has gone on in this game is organizations having effective leadership.
Right.
Like, that's very rare out here, but my reasoning is that when winter became eternal, the groups that had poor leadership did not survive. So what is left are people and organizations who understand how to be effective leaders, how to be effective members of communities, how to be not an asshole, because the assholes didn't survive winter. And to be clear, a lot of good people also didn't survive winter, but if we had the real world's leadership in Rourke, they wouldn't survive it.
Right.
They would fail to adjust to winter. So the people who made it out on the other side are more effective as organizers and just as people in general. So the setting is really rough, but I'm trying to have this world's people be much kinder and much more practically oriented, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and that shows for sure with the non-player characters that we've seen so far and that we've interacted with in the game. And so you bring up the Inquisitors, and I think that that's a good vehicle to talk about one of the really fascinating side plots or side quests that Gutoku went on along the way, and is relevant to his blindness because that sort of presents the premise for the exception to his blindness. So tell us what the Inquisitors are inquisiting.
So the Inquisitors are inquisiting witchcraft. This is a type of magic in my system that I haven't actually written down in a public way yet because I want it to be mysterious to the players. The things that Gutoku is getting involved with around witchcraft are things that I also don't want Nick to know about until he gets there. the character is as surprised as the player there. So early on in introducing Gutaku to the system was helping out an old artificer who was attacked on the trail of the pilgrimage. And as thanks, that artificer gave him a book and told him to find somebody to read that book to him. He got an NPC who was also involved in that conflict to read this book to him. And at the end of it, Gutaku realized a way to basically feel text, regardless of if there's any actual texture to it. So the first power of witchcraft he got was the ability to run his fingers along any page with text on it and be able to read that text. And so from there, he also gets into an occult system that allows him to go to a different realm through dreams. And so in that realm of dreams, it is a thing in real life that folks who lost their sight later in life but were able to see at some point, those folks can often still see things when they dream. And so in this dream realm, Gutaku isn't blind anymore. And so that has been an interesting way of both introducing this very strange realm that runs on dream logic and also be like, hey, you can see for a minute now. And the Inquisitors really, really, really do not like witches. And so witchcraft is a very secretive culture still because they have to be. And there's an overhanging threat of the Inquisitors coming in and doing whatever they can. They do not care about the law. They do not care about the ethics. The witches have to go. That's what the Inquisition essentially is. Like, this extra magic system is a way to also give abilities to characters that are odd in a way, that don't really fit into the rest of the system's kind of model, and gives them just a little bit of extra tools to go through, usually in social or puzzle-solving situations.
Yeah, and so it would make it really hard to basically make those be skills, talents, or abilities that you can acquire based on the text of your system. Like, you can't really write a lot of those things into the game book, at least at this stage, because it doesn't have a combat application. And
I want to push that back on that a little bit. There is a whole lot of non-combat in my system already.
That's true.
You can talk to whatever you want to talk to, and that is because of the non-combat choices you have made. I just want to make it clear. There are a lot of rules about combat, because I like tactical combat, and I like running tactical combat, so I want that to be a part of the system. But I also want people to have varied things they can do when they're not in combat. And one of the reasons that this arc went so well is because everybody involved used their non-combat abilities in a way that was really effective. I'm thinking about this from a problem-solving perspective, and everything the characters are doing makes sense to do in that situation and would be effective. And therefore, because the characters are making good choices, your combat scenarios were much less threatening because you knew what you were getting into. Part of that is also that you got good rolls at some important parts. For the final boss fight section, if the players had not rolled as well as they did, like everybody rolled at least average, several people rolled above average, if you had not rolled well and made effective decisions, I was going to have the boss come to you.
Yeah.
But everybody worked together, everybody rolled well, everybody made good decisions, and it's like, you find the boss before the boss finds you, which means you get to dictate how the fight goes. And by doing that, it completely ruined my plans in a way that I was very happy to see, because I had a chase sequence involved, but because you started the fight, and because Balam is so good at locking characters down and keeping them from running away, The chase sequence didn't happen. You killed it before that could start. So I started this as a matter of being like, hey, this isn't all combat, but I also want to point out that it's also a matter of the characters made good choices, and I wanted to reflect that in the way things played out. If characters behave effectively, they're going to have better results.
Yeah, well, and that's another reason why I've really, I think, had a good time with this system and with this story, is because I've got a lot of really experienced role-playing gamers around me, right? Like, yeah. I think that the writing ability and the fighting ability and the decision-making that experienced players like Balam and Alani and Inesco as well are bringing to this is rubbing off on me and supporting my sort of growth into this role, and is helping me sort of make good decisions as well, you know, and making it also so that, like, I don't know, I think that you put it well in that we did a lot of good information gathering before the big boss fight, which essentially made it so that we could dictate the rhythm and set the tempo. And I do like about the system that you can do that. You can ramp into these fights in a way that makes them, of course, still high stakes, but makes them less mortally threatening, or even, you could say, like, less mentally or physically challenging for the player characters or for us out here, right? Like, there's a number of different possibilities. Like, you can make it so that it's a really tough puzzle and it's a really hard fight, and you really come close to scraping the bottom and you still win in the end, and it's very gratifying. Or you can make it so that you have all this information that you found through investigation, and you are able to make use of the environment and the skills of the characters that you have, and essentially decide the fight before it happens and plan accordingly, and make it look a certain way as to protect everybody and support everybody, so that bad rolls don't go as badly as they might otherwise, right? And this is moving more into how to be good at Dox's game rather than what is good about Dox's game, if that makes sense. Like, we're talking about how to play well and how to be a good player, but I think that the overall point is that we have 3 good players that are playing the game very well.
We have 4 good players that are playing the game very well.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, yeah, it's 3 good players who are helping me be a better player, and that's what I really like.
For what it's worth, we are putting you in at the deep end. These characters, Dungeons and Dragons is the system that people know, so I'm going to reference it so people understand what's going on. An equivalent character in Dungeons and Dragons would be something like level 7 or level 8, and as a character gets further in progression, playing them becomes more complicated. So you didn't have as much of an on-ramp with... We did start you with a level 1 character, but then we kind of skipped to level 5, level 6, level 7, and level 8 really quickly, in a way that makes that a difficult transition for a new player. And it started with a couple of direct, hey, here are some things about your sheet that you should focus on more. It took you a while, it seemed like, to realize, oh wait, I have 1 million NP. I need to use this NP more aggressively, and kind of figuring out how that part of the system works. But it also makes sense that that would be an awkward point for Gutaku, the character. Like, we had a moment in the first time where he's actually in a fight with Preta that was like zooming in on him being like, oh shit, I might be about to die. There are creatures here who want to eat me. And that is a part of the character that coincides with the player. And one of Gutaku's things is that he has a magic staff that contains some essence of a being that can speak to him and give him advice. We just named it Prajna in the introduction to the character. And so it was a matter of, like, Prajna coming out of the staff for the moment to being like, hey, wake up, do it now. This is for real. And, like, that was just a good scene to kind of pause in the middle of that first fight and check in on what's going on in Gutaku's head.
Yeah, that was a really good plot moment for me. That was very engaging and surprising, and it definitely it hit Gutoku and me the same way. Prajna is Sanskrit for wisdom, and if I have my notes about this correct, Prajna is the attendant of the Cosmic One that represents or manifests the Cosmic One's infinite wisdom and knowledge. And so this staff that Gutoku carries around, it's modeled after like a Shikoku pilgrimage staff, which I used on my pilgrimage whenever I went. It's at this stage, it's just a wooden staff that is about 4.5 feet long, and it's got like a silken cloth over the top that has a bell kind of sewn to it. And this staff is interesting because it is, in game mechanics terms, kind of like a familiar. And so Gutoku is either always holding it or always knows where it is. But it also kind of functions similarly to like a wizard's staff in like narrative fantasy, where like he uses it to cast his healing spells. And so a crucial ending point to him using his healing abilities in combat or out is that Kongo's bell always rings.
To be clear, Kongo is the name of the staff.
Kongo is the name of the staff. It may ring like thrash around and sound very violent if we're casting a spell under duress or casting a very expensive spell, or it'll ring gently if it's like a very soft moment and a very like not very mana expensive kind of cast. And Kongo's bell can also ring to indicate to Gutoku other situational type stuff. We haven't used that very often because you need to write the plot around it, right? Like that you've written the plot around it before, and it really does kind of zoom in on Gutoku more than anybody else. But sometimes as an indicator that something environmental is going on or something is changing or happening, Kongo will ring rather, and Gutoku will know something's going down. And yeah, I think that having that staff be a part of the plot has been really fun as well. And being able to model it after like a Shikoku Kongozue and sort of having him relate with that and be a part with that. It also has the function, of course, of being kind of like a way for him to feel out his environment because he can't see. So he can use it to check his footing in front of him and support him if like the ground is unsteady or anything like that. And that helps him walk and interact with the world as much as also helping him cast his healing spells.
Yeah. Writing the supernatural beings that are behind Kongo's function, especially Prajna, was a lot of fun because I got to imitate the way the sutras are written as part of role-playing Prajna. The first meeting, I had multiple lines with Prajna that would restate questions that Gutoku had asked in an abbreviated way that I was aiming to sound like what the Buddha says in the sutras in a lot of cases. So like if Gutoku asked a series of like, what is going on here? Why is this happening? Prajna would reply, what? Question mark, and then an answer. And then a little afterwards it'd be like, and the why? Question mark, and then an answer. In a way that I hope captured the same kind of rhythm that comes in the sutras.
Yeah, it definitely, it felt like stepping into the setting of one of the sermons in a way that it was an interesting sort of, go inside the mind or go outside of reality moment, because that particular episode with Prajna was happening, like you said, in combat. So like combat started and it was almost like, it felt very referential to the Buddhist sutras, and it also felt referential to the Bhagavad Gita. So that's like not something that we've talked about on Bright on Buddhism hardly ever, but it's essentially the same thing happening where Arjuna is in the middle of a war between his family and also his family, but a different faction. And he like stops in the middle of the fighting in his chariot and he like can't go on. He's like, how am I supposed to fight? This is scary. Those are my family and friends over there. What is even the purpose of this fighting, blah, blah, blah. And the whole Bhagavad Gita is Krishna stopping in the middle of this battlefield in the course of however short of an amount of time that you want to interpret, and basically like coaching him and teaching him and leading him. It's a god, Krishna, who is manifesting as Arjuna's attendant, and he like freezes time, or you could say he just like zooms into Arjuna's mind in this like moment, this instant that's been stretched out. And he, Arjuna says, "Why must I fight?" And then just like Prajna said, just like you said, Dox, in the scene, "Why must you fight?" ? Because X, Y, and Z. And it goes on like this for a while. And then in the end of it, you kind of zoom back out to the combat at hand, to the conflict at hand, and you follow the rest of the trajectory of the war. And so at once, while it was feeling like the sermons, it also had that referential feel to the Bhagavad Gita that I really enjoyed.
That was unintentional, but a good thing to know. I've not read the Bhagavad Gita, so I don't know much about it, but it also sounds like the Bhagavad Gita's writing could have influenced sutta writings as well.
Oh, very much, yeah.
Like there's a chicken and egg aspect to that kind of thing, and it's always cool to hear that I've made a reference to something that I didn't mean to make a reference to. That's always a fun little, oh, hey, different writers coming to the same idea kind of thing, because these kinds of ideas are compelling regardless of who has them. So whether it was the Bhagavad Gita, whether it was the suttas, or whether it was me at the time not even realizing that we're doing the same thing, it's still going to be an effective idea. That's why you see ideas shared across multiple cultures that appear to be in sync, but it's really just different people discovering the same thing that is effective. Because it's going to be effective anywhere.
Yeah, we've got a case of coevolution going on here. And,
yeah.
And you're right about not to get back into the Bright-on Buddhism of it all, but you are right about the chicken and egg situation, because the Bhagavad Gita is a passage or a section from the Mahabharata, which is an epic poem that was put to paper or put down around the same time that the suttas were put down. It was 1st, 2nd century Common Era. So it's definitely like in the literary mindset of the Indian authors and the Chinese authors and the Central Asian authors and compilers of the sutras as we know them. So form-wise, language-wise, syntax and structure-wise, there's going to be so many similarities. And so it doesn't surprise me that you were able to basically hit that target, because, it does kind of pervade the text that we've been engaging with on the show. And it's fascinating and fun too that, Buddhism is having such an influence on the Rourke world and on the characters in it, right? I think it's common to see a lot of Western religious influence in fantasy that just kind of, I don't know, it's like played out. It may have been interesting and cool at one point, but you're either looking at like recapitulations of Christianity, or you're looking at recapitulations of Greek gods, or somewhere in between for the most part. Now, there are like notable exceptions that I very much enjoy, but it's fun to see an alternative here where we're looking at and zooming in on a religion in universe that doesn't borrow from these religious traditions at all and breaks that pattern of either having like a Christian style God that can't be seen and does not really act in the world, or having Greek style gods, which are just basically like high powered humans that are like so high powered that they're beyond the capacity of the game and can be really game changing allies or game ending enemies. Like I said, it was cool at one time, but you see it so much that it just kind of has lost its flair. And so it's really fun to bring Buddhism into this world in a very real and very immediate way and develop it as not necessarily shaping the conflict or even really moderating or mediating the conflict, but just being an important plot device and character device.
I've more or less talked about what I wanted to talk about on this episode. Any other notes you wanted to hit?
I think that if you're good, I'm good.
So, ending an episode like this is tough because it ends when we're done thinking of things to talk about. And I think we've hit that here. If this sounds interesting to you and you have not played in a tabletop game before, I encourage you to go and try and find one. There are a lot of ways to do it. Check out online. There are also, usually, if there is a game store nearby, they will have role-playing game nights. I don't like Dungeons and Dragons myself, but it is not a bad introduction to the hobby as a whole, so I am going to voice my dislike of Dungeons and Dragons as usual going forward, but if that is the game that people are running and you want to try the hobby out as a whole, then I do encourage you to even try Dungeons and Dragons and just try doing this role-playing game things with some people. It is a really rewarding experience, and it's not nearly as intimidating as it looks like from outside. For one, everyone else in the room is doing the same thing. Like, if we're in a room playing it together, this is a excuse for us to make funny voices at each other or, do something ridiculous in that way. Like, there's a lot of different ways a role-playing game can work. It can be this kind of, we're getting into the writing and we're making a story and we're, collaborating on basically writing a chapter of a novel every week. It can also be a group of folks kicking down the door in a dungeon and rolling some dice. It can also be folks who don't even want to do combat and focus more on the character interactions instead. There are a lot of different ways a tabletop game can look that is fun. So I do encourage you to go and try and find one.
If I have anything to add to that, it would be that outside of the tabletop gaming community, you might have an idea that it's like, oh, it's always going to be like knights and goblins or some sort of high fantasy setting that is referential to Lord of the Rings, right? And that does speak to Dungeons and Dragons' original sort of inception, was like an inspiration from the work of J.R.R. Tolkien. But what you'll actually find is that there is a tabletop gaming setting for everybody out there. So I've heard of, but not participated in, 1920s detective thriller role-playing games. I've heard of course, like sci-fi settings and sci-fi games that are very high-tech and make use of a lot of, fictional and futuristic settings and technology and abilities. We actually, in our off time in this group, sometimes play kind of like a Voltron-style game where everybody wears mech suits and we, do our fighting and combat in mech suits.
And listener, if you are thinking of Lancer, that is not the mech suit game we're talking about. Lancer is a different thing. That's the mech game that everybody knows.
Yeah. There's tons of settings and tons of time periods, tons of different kinds of tabletop games. So, like, there's no doubt that if you don't like the fantasy and the dragons and elves and orcs of it all, then still you'll probably find something for you.
Yeah, there's a role-playing system or setting for everything. And if you are an experienced TTRPG player and your experience is entirely Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder, I encourage you to try a different system. There are a lot of systems out there, and I am frankly very frustrated that the hobby as a whole is often referred to as just Dungeons and Dragons. It's like back in the early 90s where we were talking about video games being Nintendo. I love my Nintendo, don't get me wrong, but the hobby is bigger than that. So, yeah, get into it, and if you're already into it, try something new. That would be the message I want to end this episode on. So, yeah, there we go. That was it. Thank you for listening to a couple of nerds talk about their role-playing game. And next week, we are probably going to be back on Buddhism as usual.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. If you like our show and would like to support us financially, we ask instead that you send that generosity to a worthy cause. For now, we ask that you donate to a local food bank. We encourage international listeners to do this as well, but this especially goes out to our American listeners. The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP for short, is currently suspended. SNAP benefits help feed people all across the U.S., particularly people with children or who are disabled, elderly, and/or people of color. This is going to leave many Americans unable to afford food. Right now, food banks are the best equipped to help people affected. Times are hard, and they're only going to get worse before they get better. If we're going to get through this, we have to take care of each other. If you can, we recommend that you donate cash instead of food. These groups buy their supplies at wholesale prices, which are much lower than retail prices that most consumers will pay. They can stretch a dollar a lot farther than most of us. We also suggest that you donate locally, which you can do by searching your zip code on feedingamerica.org's Find Your Local Food Bank section, linked in the show notes. Thank you. My name is Nick Bright, scholar of East Asian religions and the voice of Hearer.
And I'm Dox, editor, question asker, and voice of Hermit.
And this has been Bright on Buddhism. Thank you for listening. If you like our podcast, or if you have any questions that you'd like us to discuss, we'd love to hear from you. Please consider leaving a comment, review, or subscribing. You can also reach us by email at bright.on.buddhism@gmail.com. As always, citations and resources for this episode can be found in the show notes. Thank you.